Hey guys, it's me again, and today I'm going to be talking about the Spanish Empire. Pretty much, I'm going to be making a series of European empires, and the first video of the series will, be about the Spanish Empire. Let's get straight into it. Before the Spanish Empire even existed, the Iberian Peninsula consisted of Portugal, the Kingdom of Castile, and the Kingdom of Aragon. The Spanish Empire became a thing when the Queen of Castile, Isabella I of Castile, and Ferdinand II of Aragon married and combined both kingdoms. But even with the combination of both kingdoms, it really wasn't official until the year 1700. But anyways, in 1492, some guy called Christopher Columbus discovered the Americas after asking the Queen and King of Spain to pay for his voyage, since the rest of Europe rejected him. After Columbus discovered the Caribbean, he and his men committed atrocities to the native Tainos, to the point that many people today think that they're extinct. But it turns out that there's probably around 4,000 Tainos alive today, and many people in the Caribbean have at least some ancestry leading up to the Tainos. But anyways, Spain then of course conquered many Caribbean islands and turned them into colonies. Of course, later on Spain would end up losing most of its Caribbean islands and only having Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Dominican Republic, after losing most of its Caribbean islands to Britain, France, and the Dutch. Anyways, in 1518, a Spanish conquistador called Juan de Grivala did an expedition to Yucatan, and after his expedition, another Spanish conquistador called Hernan Cortez led an expedition to Mexico after hearing stories of gold in the area. Cortez and his men then found themselves in the Aztec Empire and the capital of Tenochtitlan. The natives at first were actually really friendly to the new guest, especially the king, which was Moctezuma II, who was actually killed by his own people after trying to justify the Spanish atrocities to the empire. But he was pretty much forced to justify it for them because, of course, he was aware of what the Spanish were doing. But it's also thought that Moctezuma was killed by the Spanish. But I'm not really sure what really happened to him. But anyways, in 1521, Cortez and his men and many other native groups that were against the Aztecs did a last attack on Tenochtitlan and finally ended the existence of the Aztec Empire. Later on, the Spanish did more expeditions to Central America and expeditions to what is now U.S. states of California, New Mexico, Arizona, and Texas, and were able to conquer more land than ever. Anyways, the Spanish did move south and invaded what is now Venezuela and Colombia. And in 1532, a conquistador, Francisco Pizzaro, and his brothers and about 160 Spaniards attacked the Incan Empire when it was discovered by the Spanish in 1528. And incredibly, the Spanish conquest of the Incan Empire took decades of fighting, until finally in 1572, the war ended in a Spanish victory, and the king of the Incan Empire, which was Atahualpa, was thought to be killed by smallpox brought by Europeans. And also, incredibly, in the long decades of war between the Spanish and the Incans, about 8,000 indigenous people in the Incan Empire died of war and disease. After the Spanish victory, the Spanish established the viceroyalty of Peru. And also, with the destruction of the Aztec Empire, the Spanish established the viceroyalty of New Spain. The Spanish moved swiftly to what is now parts of Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay, and parts of Chile. But Spanish expansion came to a halt when the Spanish faced off against an indigenous group called the Mapuche, who were actually very good at fighting against the Spanish. And later on, Spain failed to take the Mapuche's land, and later on, the Spanish established the viceroyalty of New Granada, and also established the viceroyalty of Rio de la Plata. And of course, many immigrants from Spain started to immigrate to these new territories to either have a better opportunities or to find stuff such as gold. But anyways, let's rewind a bit, back to the year 1522. A Portuguese-born Spanish explorer called Ferdinand Magellan, doing some Spanish expeditions around the world, stumbled upon the Filipino islands of the Philippines, and he claimed the islands for the Spanish Empire. And after that, many Spanish explorers started to visit the islands. And finally, a Spanish explorer called Miguel Lopez de Legazpi arrived from Mexico in 1565 and formed the first settlements in what is now the city of Cebu in the Philippines, which kick-started the colonization of the Philippines. And also, in 1571, the Spanish, their Latin American recruits, and their Filipino allies, commanded by conquistadors such as Mexican-born Juan de Salcedo, did an attack on Manila, which was a vassal state of the Sultanate of Brunei, and also annexed the kingdom and established the Spanish East Indies. and making the capital Manila. Anyways, about 9 years later of the Spanish conquest of the Philippines, Spain's neighbor, Portugal, was having a crisis in the Portuguese throne. And well, after some discussions, it was agreed that the Spanish monarchy would take over the Portuguese throne. And a union occurred between Spain and Portugal called the Iberian Union, which lasted from 1580 to 1640. The union came to an end in 1640 because the Dutch Empire saw the weakening of the Portuguese Empire and sought to take its colonies. And well, it tried to, and actually at first they were actually quite successful. But after Portugal finally got its independence from Spain and went to war with the Dutch and regained its colonies. Anyways, at the start of the 1700s, Spain was kind of going through a decline, to be honest. After some wars with the French, the British, and the Dutch, it spent its time trying to somehow fix the economy and stabilize the empire. And suddenly, in the year 1700, Spain's King Charles II of Spain died without a successor. And well, after some negotiations with the French, it was decided that Philip V would beat the Spanish Empire. And the guy was, I guess, you can say was actually real alright, because mostly he was able to defeat the Austrians and the British in an invasion against Spain, but lost Spanish territories in Europe to the Austrians because he pretty much just gave them away to Austria, and also lost Gibraltar to the British. Anyways, after many decades later, the American Revolution started after the result of the French and Indian War, because Britain was broke, and because of the war, it started taxing the American colonists and also treat them kind of bad. So the American colonies in France and Spain fought against the British, and finally the British were defeated and the Americans were finally independent. And well, after a few decades, Spain started to go through another decline. It started taxing its colonies, it was tightening control on the colonies, and were fighting off foreigners. And suddenly, around the same time, the French Revolution started. And after a few years after the revolution, Napoleon Bonaparte got into power and started an invasion of Europe. And at that time, Spain was a good ally of Napoleonic France, so they had an agreement that they would both invade Portugal. And finally, they did. In November 1807, France and Spain invaded Portugal, and the Portuguese monarchy had no choice but to escape to its colony of Brazil. And in progress, France betrayed Spain and also took over the capital, Madrid, and occupied completely the Iberian Peninsula. And while Spain's colonies weren't really happy of Spain's treatment of them, and that now France was basically owning them now, that kickstarted the Latin American Wars of Independence. And of course, as we know, Spain and Portugal and the rest of Europe defeated Napoleon twice. And now Spain had to somehow gain control of its colonies again, because now Latin America was now fighting for its independence, of course. Well, Spain tried its best, but soon lost to regain its control of its colonies. And soon new countries were made, and Spain's only possessions were now Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. In 1822, the Dominican Republic was annexed by Haiti, but after getting their independence from Haiti, they had some economic problems and internal problems. So they asked Spain to annex them, but after 4 years, they declared their independence from Spain. And now again, Spain only had its 3 possessions. After a few decades, the Berlin Conference happened. And well, basically, European powers split up the African continent, and Spain got 2 new territories, so that was nice for them. But what happens next is not, because independence movements started to happen in Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. And of course, the Spanish were able to crush the independent movements, and later on, out of the shadows, the United States of America emerged. And it said, I blame the man on Spain. Alright, for context, basically, the United States at that time was turning a bit imperialist and wanted to expand its territory. And well, it's thought that the U.S. blamed the Spanish for bombing the U.S.'s Maine as an excuse to declare war and take its colonies. And well, their strategy worked really well, actually, because the Americans invaded Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. And of course, Spain tried its best fighting off the Americans, but with its empire crumbling and its incapability to fight off the Americans, it had no choice but to give out their territory. And of course, that was a huge humiliation for the Spanish, because they just lost the war to an ex-colony of another empire. But anyways, Spain at that point was just by itself. Its empire was basically destroyed, and then boom, World War I happened. Spain stayed neutral and wanted nothing to do with the war. And Spain for a while was just doing its own thing. Then in 1931, it went through a complete change. The monarchy lost power, and it went through a second republic known as the Second Spanish Republic, which lasted to 1939, because suddenly a civil war started at that time, known as the Spanish Civil War. And there was two factions. One, the Republican faction led by Manuel Anzana, and the Nationalist Party led by Francisco Franco. Many countries helped each faction. For example, in the Republican faction was supported by the Soviet Union, Mexico, and France. And the Nationalists supported by Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, and Portugal, in the Holy See. And after huge casualties in the war, the Nationalists, led by Francisco Franco, defeated the Republican faction. And later on, Francisco Franco turned into a dictator. He suppressed the Spanish people for many years, resulting in many Spaniards immigrating to places such as Mexico, Argentina, Venezuela, and Cuba. And then, as we all know, the Second World War broke out, and Spain was once again neutral. Adolf Hitler really wanted Spain to join the Axis powers, but Franco refused, which actually pissed off Hitler so much to the point that in an interview one time he said that he'd rather rip out his own teeth than see Franco ever again. And well, later on, the Axis powers lost the Second World War, and many countries such as the US and Cuba were concerned about Franco. And countries such as Cuba suggested to do a Latin American invasion of Spain. But the British suggested the Americans to leave Franco alone, since Franco hated communism and the Cold War was starting, so the US agreed to leave Franco alone. And well, Franco stayed in power until his death in 1975. And well, a few months later, the Spanish Empire came to an end because of the decolonization of Africa, which meant that its two colonies would be independent, which resulted in two new territories being independent, one being the Republic of Equatorial Guinea and Spanish Sahara. But Spanish Sahara has a huge situation with its neighbor up north, Morocco, because the Moroccans invaded the country, and now pretty much they control 90% of its territory. But let's see what happens in the future with that dispute. But anyways, like I said before, finally, the Spanish Empire came to an end. After years of colonization, conquest, civil wars, this empire brought its language, its culture to many parts of the world. Now, obviously, I can't deny the atrocity the Spanish committed, but if it weren't for its history, the world would be very different today. Well, thank you guys for watching this video. Look, I know I have a lot of explaining to do. I know like a month ago or over a month ago, I said specifically in the end of that video that I was going to do a video, and I promised I was going to do a video. Look, the video was supposed to be this one that you're watching right now. But the thing is, I swear, I did not expect for this video to take so much long. It's just things like school and a lot of other stuff prohibited me to do, the video. But anyways, today's election day. And, maybe after this video, I might make a video about that. Look, I'm going to be completely honest. I think Joe Biden is going to win. I may be wrong. But simply, I just hope Joe Biden wins. Trump is a disgusting failure, and he failed this country since coronavirus started. And to be honest, I just hope for the victory of Joe Biden. And if he wins, I might make a video. If Trump wins once again, I might make a video about him. I mean, I made many videos about Trump before, so this might not be something new for you guys who have watched me for years, but yeah. Anyways, like I said before, thank you guys for watching this video. And remember, kids, eat your vegetables.